And thank you for not reading that entire thing. I was worried for a while. I was graciously volunteered for this, which I found out when I saw my name on the schedule. But anyway, seems kind of a shortage of an audience.
We'll be broadcasting on the internet.
Gotcha. So, question, what is Bitcoin? The biggest problem with the answers to this question that I've seen out there is that Bitcoin was invented by cryptographers and programmers, so when somebody asks what is Bitcoin, the answer they get is, well, you have this mining thing, and there's this public and private key cryptography, and then these miners do these SHA-256 hashes, and blah, 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 technical stuff that sounds like for foreign language. So, I do have an IT background, but I come more from a business finance background, so I wanted to figure out how to explain it in the easiest possible way. So, next slide. My idea is explain it as to a 5-year-old basically. So the way Bitcoin works is, let's pretend we have two people, let's call them Bob and Jane, and they each have a piece of paper that has a list of accounts and balances. So there's Bob's account 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, Jane's is 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. They originally they might not know who each account and the balance belongs to, but let's say that Bob knows that his account is so and so, and Jane gives him her. So Bob wants to send the transaction to Jane. So next
slide, please.
Bob basically takes out a scrap of paper and writes on it from account so-and-so, my account, to Jane's account, send, say, $3, and then signs it with a signature. Now, the signature for Bitcoin, you can kind of imagine it like a signature on a check, where you can write it and anybody can look at it and verify it, but it's really hard to forge. Bitcoin uses cryptography to kind of make that a more secure option. Basically, every account out there has its own little key that lets you unlock it, and that key creates a signature. But anyway, he writes a little piece of paper, passes it on to Jane, and on his own account, piece of paper, he subtracts $3 from his account and adds $3 to Jane's account. So now the updated balance is 2 for him, 6 for her. Next slide. Jane can take a look at her copy of the paper and see that Bob really does have the money and the signature is really valid. So she takes her paper and updates it as well. Next slide. But what's going on is, since Bitcoin is fully distributed, there's a lot of other people also with their own copies of the exact same piece of paper that get to hear all of these transactions going through as well. So whenever they hear it, they might not know who the accounts belong to, but they also update it on their own pieces of paper as well. Now, let's say that Bob wants to be sneaky. Next slide. And wants to send, even though he only has 2 Bitcoins, he wants to send 8 Bitcoins to Jane. So he writes on a piece of paper saying, from my account to yours, send $8, signs it, the signature is valid. However, when Jane receives it, she can see that that account does not have that much money. So she rejects it. And so does everybody else who hears it. Now let's say Bob wants to counterfeit money and create it out of nothing. So he creates a completely new account, some random number, and he creates an actual valid signature and key for it, and he tries to send that to Jane. But in this case, Jane looks over at her paper, and that account isn't even on a piece of paper. So once again, she rejects it. So Bitcoin is basically validated by everybody. Everybody who is involved, who uses a wallet or either has direct access to these pieces of papers, account ledgers, or has access to somebody else who does. So because of this, Bitcoin, you can't double spend it, you can't forge it, and you can't just create it out of thin air. So Bitcoin is extremely secure, not because of really complex codes that we haven't found bugs in yet, but because it's almost literally that simple, and there's just nothing there to hack or break. Everybody just checks everything constantly. Thanks. So Bitcoin has a lot of different uses. Its main one is right now is as a currency. And as a currency, it's durable. You can back it up. You can store it on a piece of paper, USB drives, whatever you want. It's extremely portable. Obviously, there's a World Wide Web. You can also print Bitcoins to pieces of paper or store them in USB keys, carry them around even in your head if you memorize a private key. It's fungible. There's no difference between one Bitcoin and another. It's scarce. There's only 21 million that will ever be created. And the scarcity is maintained by the rules that everybody who checks these pieces of paper follows. It's divisible down to 8 decimal places, and we can go further if we need to. So even if Bitcoin costs $1 million, it's still not going to be a problem because we just use smaller and smaller fractions of it. And it's recognizable. Like in the old days, you can check whether gold is real by doing an acid test. With Bitcoin, the cryptography in your wallet just automatically does it for you. As I said, there's no way to create a fake Bitcoin, and real ones are always checked and verified. Next. So, if you use regular money, why would you use Bitcoin? Well, first, it's fast. If you want to send money from a bank account to somebody else's bank account, it typically takes 2 days. If you want to receive a credit card payment, you'll see the transaction right away, but it'll take a couple of days for you to actually get it. With Bitcoin, you see the transaction within seconds, the money is spendable within 10 minutes. It's a lot cheaper. There's none of that banking infrastructure with the vaults, the accountants, the security, and all that. It's just all built into the protocol, so there's no fees to pay for all those expensive things. It's a lot more secure, as I've explained, with cryptography and everybody checking everything constantly. It's global. Not only does it reach everywhere where you have internet, but Bitcoin is based on communication, so if you can pick up a phone, dial somebody, and read off the transaction that was signed on your computer, you can use Bitcoin. So anywhere where you can reach somebody by communication, you can use it. It's as private or public as you want. There's services called tumblers that can mix your Bitcoin with other people to make it impossible to trace which Bitcoins are yours and which ones are not. Or if you want to be public, like for example, the charity that I work for, Bitcoin 100, we use a public Bitcoin address to receive donations and send money out. So in that way, everybody can always track our account books completely publicly, and if we do anything, they'll find out right away. And most importantly, it's an open platform, which means that it's totally free for anybody to start developing on top of, and I'll get back into that a little later. Next. So, let's say you're a merchant. What are your benefits? First one is transaction fees are really low. For credit cards, typically the transactions are about 2.5, 2.7%. For some of the more, I guess, vice-type businesses like porn and gambling, for example, it's up to 10% apparently, because there's a huge incidence of chargebacks. Whereas with Bitcoin, you can accept through a merchant processor like BitPay or Coinbase, and they will convert the money to dollars for you, where you never even have to see the Bitcoins, and they charge you less than 1% for that transaction. So right away, you're saving money. Second is there's no chargebacks. This may be a problem for customers that want to be able to mediate disputes, but for a merchant, that means that if there's a problem, instead of you suddenly getting a surprise where your money gets yanked out, the customer would actually have to contact you and talk to you. So you can actually figure out what's going on. And also this lets you sell into high-risk services like the ones I mentioned, porn, gambling, stuff like that, and also to places around the world that may be unavailable or risky to sell to. Mostly if you look at the list of companies that PayPal allows you to send money out of but not into those countries, those are the ones that you want to use Bitcoin for. Another big one, if you are using credit cards, that means that you need to create a database that stores your customer information, their name, address, date of birth, and credit card information into a very secure database. It has to go through a lot of regulations and checks, because if anything from there gets stolen, your customers get screwed. And you also have to retain this data for a very, very long time, like 1 year or longer. Whereas with Bitcoin, if hackers were to break in and steal, like with Target, they stole 40 million credit cards. If they were to steal 40 million accounts that were using Bitcoin, the worst they can do is find addresses to send spam mail to. That's it. There's no way to steal money if all you have is a Bitcoin address. And the final one is access to a global market. If you're in a small country someplace or a little island nation, typically, or actually any country, typically financial systems are limited to within that country. So if you're in the US, it's a little difficult to do global sales because you have to go through the international money transfers, whereas if you add Bitcoin as a sale option, all of a sudden you can sell to anybody in the world. And the first companies that actually benefited from this were web service providers like DNS, VPN, stuff like that, because now instead of having to search for somebody to register your domain within US, you can go out and look for the entire world and it won't matter. Next. As a customer or a user, opening a Bitcoin account is a lot easier than opening a bank account. You install an app on your phone or download an application to your computer and that's it. No forms to sign up. They don't care whether how old you are, how rich or poor you are, or where you live. The other one is your money is always available. Banks work from 9 till 4. Usually when you're at work, that's the only time the bank is open. And they don't work on weekends. With Bitcoin, you can move your money whenever you want. And also, all your money is always available, so you're not limited to like ATM cash withdrawals or transfer withdrawals. It's a lot easier to send money to other people, like friends and family, in person or long distance with Bitcoin than it is through banking apps. Typically with Bitcoin, you get an address, you hit send, that's it. With banking apps or going up online, you have to figure out what their account is and go through a whole bunch of systems to actually take care of that. And finally, no restrictions. As I said, Bitcoin doesn't care about who you are or where you live, and it doesn't care about what your financial restrictions of your country might be. So if you want to send more than $10,000 someplace, or if you want to send to somebody who is in a country that your country does not like, or if your country generally does not like you as a citizen, you can still do whatever you want with your money. For example, in Ukraine, they just recently implemented a $100 a day withdrawal. And we know that in Argentina, they have, you're not allowed to buy more than, I think $250 worth of stuff a year, and you can only do it twice a year or something through online merchants or something. It's really messed up. Next. If you're an investor, why would you use Bitcoin? In the last year, Bitcoin had 5,400% growth. It's grown 2 times in 2012 when it was a really kind of nobody was talking about period. Before that, it grew 16 times. And generally, it's expected to keep growing at a rather rapid pace. And the reason for that is, first, we've already had $100 million invested by VCs into various companies. There's over 300 companies at this point. And the point of that is Bitcoin is not just like something that just appeared and might go away. There's a lot of people and a lot of support behind it at this point who do not want to see it fail. It's also deflationary, so like if you're into stocks, you know that with Bitcoin you will not get diluted. There will not be any more shares created that'll lower your own holdings. And the most important one is Bitcoin developers. A lot of them don't care about the price of Bitcoin. They're basically fanatical about the idea of Bitcoin and what it stands and how it'll change the world. So a good example of what I heard about this is basically Bitcoin developers are like the Linux developers over the last 20 years, where a long time ago Linux was really hard to use and Windows was all designed for home use, and with Bitcoin versus sorry, I just saw Lamborghini drive by, with Bitcoin versus compared to Linux versus like the banking system with Microsoft. Essentially it's like right now the banks would come up with like, hey, we have this new banking app and we have all these new features and stuff. It's kind of like Windows coming up and saying, hey, we have this really awesome, new feature in our Windows stuff, and the Linux programmers are just like, yeah, okay, what? Yeah, I don't care. And yeah, for like 10 years ago, Linux people were kind of made fun of, just like Bitcoin is now, because the system was really difficult to use and a pain in the butt, and guilty here too. And 15 years later, they're vindicated with things like Ubuntu and our Android phones. So this kind of belief will pretty much almost guarantee that Bitcoin will get to where people want it to get, because, as I said, they're not about the price, they're about the idea. Next. And as a developer, the biggest one is Bitcoin for Finances is an open platform. Now, what that means is, an example, we had AT&T and Baby Bells, or the landline phone service, for the last century, which are closed-in systems owned by the big phone monopolies. So if you wanted to use it, you had to ask permission for the phone system. If you wanted to innovate, you had to ask permission from the phone companies. If you wanted to do any kind of fun innovation, you're basically limited to doing stuff on the fringes. So we had, wireless phones, we had answering machines, and that's about it for almost a century. With the internet, when that came up, all of a sudden it's fully open for anybody to start developing, whether they want to do it on the fringes or within the actual network itself. So all of a sudden we had voice over IP, Skype, Google Voice, all that kind of stuff, and it just exploded. Same thing with Bitcoin, where you have, right now we had closed systems of finance, where if you want to do any kind of financial stuff, you have to ask permission from the bank, you have to ask permission from the regulatory bodies, and most of your innovation, like Square, for example, will be out on the fringes, where you still have to ask permission from Visa to use their network, but all you can develop is stuff like, a better phone or a little better Square or something. Whereas with Bitcoin, all of a sudden you have access to everything in the technology, including even copying and creating your own versions of money with altcoins. Any other big benefits are, there's a very well-established, large, supportive community. So if you want to help something with a development, there's always somebody who can help you out with that. There is a lot of people with a lot of money sitting on the sidelines waiting for the next big thing in Bitcoin that want to invest in it. So if you come up with a good idea, there's a pretty good chance that somebody's going to dump money on you. Bitcoin has been fairly unknown for a while, and at this point most people still have no idea what the heck it is or how it works, or just simply dismiss it. But I believe that in this next year, especially with the large, there's a couple of rumors about large companies that are planning to adopt it. I believe Bitcoin is going to explode. So right now would be a really good time to get into it. And last one, of course, is that like the internet created things that we have never even imagined could exist, Bitcoin is an opportunity for people to invent something that has never been seen before. Next. I think you may have skipped one. Can you back? So if you've never been to Bitcoin, how do you get started? Very kind of first steps, I guess. If you are a regular user, you just open up an exchange account. If you're a merchant, you can open up a merchant account, and you can ask about these on places like Reddit or Bitcoin Talk. Probably Reddit's better. You can also offer to sell goods and service directly online if you run a business, or if you just have stuff you want to sell. Just say, hey, I want to, I'm taking Bitcoin for it. Or you can trade with somebody directly, such as through local Bitcoins, or there's a wallet like Mycelium's coming up, where you'll be able to trade person to person, where you there's going to be probably other wallets to do this too, where you just open it up, see who's around you who wants to pretend to be an ATM, go meet him and just trade directly. Next. If you do get into Bitcoin, there are some very important rules that you should basically memorize and stick to before you get any of them. First one is if you don't have the private keys, they are not your Bitcoins. And Mt. Gox's situation recently demonstrated it really good, really well. Essentially, the keys that I mentioned in the beginning that you use to sign your pieces of paper to prove that you actually own them, make sure that you're the one who are holding the keys to the Bitcoins. If you store your Bitcoins with a third party, chances are that you might not see them again later. That said, there are new services that are coming out that do split keys where you have one of the keys and they have the other keys. That might still be okay. And Blockchain Info is one wallet service that it seems online, but they do give you access to your keys directly, so they're kind of an exception to that as well. The second rule is back up your keys. Back up, back up, back up. My personal rule is don't put any money on anything until you backed it up first. And I started following that back when in 2011 I put 2 Bitcoins on an Android wallet, and it got screwed, and I lost the 2 Bitcoins. At the time it was $10, so no biggie. What? Not anymore, no. I'm not too upset about it, but since then, yeah, just back it up. And working in a Bitcoin side and as a consultant, I often see issues where people like, hey, I still have my public key, but I lost my private key. Can I restore it somehow? No, back it up. And rule number 3 is keep your private keys private. That's why they'll call it private. The reason I bring this up is because we've seen, like on television news, somebody got a gift of a Bitcoin paper wallet, and they were showing it off, and they showed the private key right on the TV, and that $25 on there just popped off of there within first 6 seconds. Likewise, somebody posted how they received a mycelium wallet as a tip or something, and they're like, look at this thing that somebody gave me at the restaurant, and again, they showed off the private key, gone. So don't let anybody see it, or at the very least, encrypt them. Next. Regarding actually using it, you would need a Bitcoin wallet, and there are a ton of options available out there, whether you want to keep it on your phone, on your computer, or online. And the list of wallets you can find if you go to bitcoin.org. Some of them are more secure than others. For example, Armory and Electrum allow you to keep your coins in a way that they never touch the internet, which means they're unhackable. And things like for mobile wallets, for example, Mycelium lets you do cold paper storage, spending directly off the paper without importing the keys too. But all of this information you can find just by either going to bitcoin.org or go to Reddit/r/Bitcoin and ask. So, and that's it.
Would you expand a bit on Mycelium? Maybe spend a few minutes explaining the process from beginning to end for the consumer.
So you can go to, like if you want to be really secure, you can do a paper wallet, which is the private key is stored in your paper. So you can go to either bitaddress.org or bitcoinpaperwallet.com, create a paper wallet, and one option you can do is encrypt the private key in a paper wallet using what's called BIP38. It's a fairly new encryption thing that puts a password on your private key in such a way that even if you have direct access to it, you still can't brute force it because it'll take you about a second to try each password. So with Mycelium, what you can do is print out a paper wallet in an encrypted form, carry it around with you on a piece of paper, or store it someplace at home. And there's an option in Mycelium to do cold storage spending, where you select cold storage, scan the private key, type in a password, and it only loads it into your memory, into the phone's memory. Then you can send it wherever you want to. The change gets sent right back to your piece of paper, and afterwards the key is wiped. So That way your keys are exposed only briefly in its own protected memory space, and that's it.
Can you come up if you have a question, please, for the video? Thank you.
You figure I may know something because I have my own coin, but I still don't even know. I started off as a miner, and I ended up buying a little coin called Zenith coin, but I don't know like the other side of all of this. Like, so yeah, you just created that. So now I have the wallet. Mm-hmm. I walk into a retailer that accepts Bitcoin. I buy my goods and services, say $25. Mm-hmm. He scans it on his side, right? Now, how does where does the money come into his account? And what is it, BitShare or somebody else does that exchange for, if I need to buy more inventory, me as a retailer, a merchant mm-hmm. has to see value in knowing that those funds are, right there so I can go buy more inventory and, start that process. So does the merchant, is that an easy process? If somebody, it's like cash.
Yeah, it's like cash. You would actually use...
I guess my question is, where am I redeeming the cash, into my bank account?
As a merchant, if you use a merchant service processor, such as I mentioned, BitPay, Bips, Coinbase, what they do is you would accept it, set it up the same way like you would set up Visa, where you would say, total of your items is $25, and it would actually say the total is 25. Then one of the merchant processors will convert it into Bitcoin format. Whoever pays will scan that Bitcoin address and send that amount of Bitcoins to it. And as soon as a merchant processor receives that money, they will instantly convert it to dollars and deposit it into the bank account the next day.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Oh, that's okay. And the thing about the Bitcoin, though, it's instant, it's fast. Boom, boom. No.
And the fees are small as compared to the conventional, traditional credit cards.
Yep.
Okay. Any more questions?
That was worth the price of admission.
Excellent.
I've read all books, everything. I can't find the answer.
Yeah, not to advertise much, but BitPay does a little bit less than 1% per transaction, or you can subscribe to a monthly fee. I think it's $30 for unlimited transactions through BitPay. And Coinbase, I believe they're having a promotion where the first 1 million of your revenue is free, but I'm not entirely sure. So.
Well, Dmitry, thank you for the valuable information.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.